Hi folks, Dave Schmidt here. It's the afternoon of March 4th. So what does the current world events taking place in the Ukraine have to do with the global currency reset? How does that affect us in our issue in having our dinar and dong come into fruition with the new values placed into them? Well, if you asked me that question 3 or 4 days ago, I didn't really know. But all of a sudden in the last 2 days, it's all fallen into place, and folks, it's huge. This is a huge shifting, changing event that is about to take place that has the potential to really impact the global currency reset. Well, before I go into that, to let you know some of the details on that, I am going to talk about that, and I'm going to discuss that on the March 5th radio program. But before then, I want to remind you about the upcoming workshop on March 23rd. Are you ready to be a millionaire? Are you ready to develop the millionaire mindset? Do you know what it is to have all your issues in place? In this one-day workshop, I'm going to cover the things that you need to do so not only can you be ready to move, you can have everything in place that can literally save you tens of thousands of dollars in taxes, as well as understand the big picture of why this is important for all of us. So again, I invite you to go to my website, thesedonaconnection.com, and sign up for the one-day workshop in Dallas-Fort Worth on March 23rd. So, what does all this have to do with the Ukraine? Well, about 2 months ago, I did a back-to-back series in newsletters and on the radio program talking about the global currency collapse and the global currency reset. Very credible people, namely Karen Hudes, former counsel to the World Bank, and Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, have both been saying we are headed for a global currency collapse. Not only is this beginning to pick up momentum, there was an article 2 days ago in Forbes magazine that is saying that we are very likely headed in that direction. That means the mainstream media is beginning to pick this up. That's how serious it is and how much they are aware of what's going on. So we're heading for a global currency collapse, but the only thing that stops it is a global currency reset. And what we have is this situation of two political parts of the world that are vying against this. We have, and I'm going to use the term G7, not G8. The G8 countries include Russia, but I'm going to talk about the G7 countries that do not include Russia. The G7 countries are all theoretically bankrupt. They are so far in debt that they are not going to be able to fully recover. And it is the Illuminati, the New World Order, the Bilderberg Group, who I refer to as the cabal, that has been controlling the world's money supply literally for millenniums. When you look at history and you go back millenniums, you see a situation where it has always been a very small elite that has controlled the masses. And for millenniums, they controlled the masses politically and economically. Politically because they were kings, monarchs, and dictators who controlled the masses. That shift and change came with the American Revolution. The American Revolution was a group of people for the first time that rose up and said, we have the ability to basically govern ourselves. And that set into motion what is called self-governance. So the people themselves were free from a political perspective, being able to choose their political leaders. But here's what I say is, yes, politically, the people got set free, but economically, we're not there yet. I say that economically, we're still in a position where an elite still controls the political economics, the money supply all around the world. And that is the cabal that still controls it. And their primary tool is the Federal Reserve here in the United States, which is the central bank of the United States. They control that, and they also indirectly control all the central banks all around the world. The World Bank is a tool of the Federal Reserve. The International Monetary Fund is a tool of the Federal Reserve. So while we have gained our freedom politically here in the Western world, in democracies, we haven't gained it economically. And I think the events that are happening right now in the Ukraine have the potential to be the turning point. I have said that we are in a form of an economic slavery, but we are in the process of history that is unfolding, and we are ready to be set free. To be set free, we have to enter into a global currency reset. That means all the economies of all the countries all around the world, the currencies of all the countries around the world, have to be reset where they go back to what is called commodity-based currencies and not fiat-based currencies. The cabal wants fiat currencies because as they can have fiat currencies, they can control the world's money supply. They also want a global currency collapse. Because of a collapse, they feel they can stay in control. But it's a global currency reset is what will stop that from happening. And you heard me report that there is a coalition primarily led by the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They have formed a coalition of over 160 countries that are stepping up against the G8 countries to say, we want the reset. The G8 countries, now let me correct that, the G7 countries are basically saying no because they're under the domination and control of the cabal. Their economies are controlled by the cabal. They don't want the reset. The collapse could be the catalyst that brings the reset in. Well, if you've been following the news in the last couple of days, Russia went in and took over the control of the province of Crimea in the country of Ukraine. I'm not going to go into an extensive history and background about that, but other than just a few things. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the country of Ukraine came out of the Soviet Union. The country of Russia was separate. But there was this province that was down in the Black Sea, Crimea, that really was stuck in the middle. Crimea is ethnically, the majority of the people are Russian, so they identify with the Russian ethnic influence of the country of Russia, but they were put into the country of Ukraine. But when you also understand the politics that is there, Crimea has a political sovereignty, which means they elect their own parliament and they kind of have their own rule and their control, somewhat independent of the country of Ukraine. If I was to liken an example, it would be like Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, but they have their own sovereign country with their own sovereign rule. They are under a control of the United States, but they get to sovereignly govern themselves because they are a territory. They are not a state of the United States. Well, Crimea is in the same position. The people really identify with Russia. I should say the majority of the people really identify with Russia, not Ukraine, but they're part of the country of Ukraine. And right now, Ukraine is going through a civil war. Are they leaning with the Western forces, the Western countries, the NATO countries of the United States and Europe, or are they going to lean with Russia? And they're caught in the middle, but then Crimea is really caught in the middle because of what's there. There are literally tens of thousands Russian citizens within Crimea. There is also a Navy seaport, a Russian seaport in the country, in the province of Crimea. So when all this civil war is going on, President Putin said, I'm going to send some troops in there to stabilize the Russian population, to protect the Russian citizens, and to stabilize our interest. And when that happened, the United States, through President Obama, cried foul. You don't have the right to go into a sovereign country and take control. And then President Obama has said that he's lining up the G7 countries and threatening Russia with economic sanctions to boot them out of the G8 and say we're going to freeze your assets that you have in our countries. So they're basically telling President Putin, knock it off, we're going to put economic sanctions on you. Well, guess what happened yesterday? China decided to line up with Russia. So now you have this Russian-Chinese alliance that is going against the G7 countries. And folks, do you see what's unfolding here? It's the BRIC countries telling the G7, we're probably going to call your bluff. You're saying you're going to produce economic sanctions on us? We're saying we are now strong enough economically to call your bluff, and if you attempt to do that, you will only create your own problem. Why is that? Well, Russia and China combined own over 25% of the U.S. debt, the bonds that the United States put out. They could call those bonds. They could put those bonds out on the open market and sell them, and it would crush the United States economically, because the United States right now, my understanding is, they don't have the money to pay for those bonds. It would create a huge drop in the value of the dollar. The second thing is, Russia is the second largest oil exporting country in the world, second only to Saudi Arabia. Most of their oil goes to Europe. They have huge natural gas exports that go to Europe. They could tell the European G7 countries, along with the United States, we're calling your bluff. We can put your bonds on the market, we can shut off your oil, and we can shut you down economically. Yes, the United States is the strongest military power in the world, but what's really taking place here right now is a battle of who is the strongest economic power in the world. And this is a shift that is taking place. There is a potential in this shift that when China and Russia come together as an alliance, they can say to the G7 countries, you are so far in debt that you no longer have the ability to stand up and follow through with what you're saying. We can call your bluff and we can become stronger than you. That's what's happening right now in this battle of Ukraine. Again, a couple months ago, I talked about the global currency collapse and the global currency reset. For that to happen in a natural progression, it means the BRIC countries had to come to a point through some political event around the world and say to the G7 countries, we're calling your bluff. We want a global currency reset by asset-backed currencies. If not, we have the ability now to basically overpower you. We have the ability to shut off the oil to most of Europe. We have the ability to call these bonds to be due, and you don't have the ability to pay. So President Obama has thrown out a very, very strong challenge to President Putin in Russia, saying, we're going to put economic sanctions in you. Now, what I'm about to say is my opinion. It could happen differently. It could unfold differently. I understand that, and I'm saying this as this is happening right now, today, here on March 4th in World Events. President Putin has the ability to stand face to face, nose to nose with President Obama and say, try it. Just try it. And watch a global currency collapse takes place, and then we will be in the position to bring about a global currency reset. See, what I see is happening here, folks, and this is my opinion. Economically, remember, we're not really free. Economically, the G7 is controlled by the cabal countries. The cabal countries want a chaos. They want a war because that has always been their modus operandi. Create wars, create fear, and then they have the ability to operate in secrecy behind the scenes to keep control of the money supply around the world, where they become stronger and stronger and stronger. But they're at the point now, it's backfiring on them. They've lost that control. They overstepped where they brought the G7 countries to be so deeply in debt. And what the other thing is that they didn't anticipate they didn't anticipate the rise of the BRIC countries along with people all around the world like you and me to be able to self-educate ourselves through the power of the internet. And we're stepping up and saying, no, we're not going to allow you to control the world's money supply anymore. All this is beginning to unfold. Do you see this as I see it, of what's taking place here? What's taking place right now in Ukraine is the probable shifting point that for centuries the G7 countries have held the economic power here on the globe, and this event has the potential to be the shifting point where they're no longer in power, because the BRIC countries have the ability to step in and say no more. It's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. This could be the turning point event that will lead to the global currency reset that all of you that are holding dong are dependent upon, because the dong is not going to revalue until there's a global currency reset, and the dinar will very likely be a part of that. And I did talk about, again, a couple months ago, global currency reset, global currency collapse. We're on the verge for a collapse. The collapse is coming. The economic experts are saying that. It's even beginning to be talked about in the mainstream media. That is inevitable. That is going to happen. The only thing that stops it is the global currency reset. And what is taking place right now in Ukraine could be the shift in power that brings that about. So let's stay tuned. I'm going to talk about this on the radio program tomorrow night on March 5th. I'm also going to talk about, as a follow-up to what I talked about last week, where everybody was saying events were ready to come up and it was ready to happen, and the global currency reset, or the exchange of the reset of the dinar was ready to happen, and it didn't happen. I'm going to talk about some opinions on why I think that hasn't happened, because of what's taking place, because of a couple situations. And again, this is my opinion based on the intel that I'm receiving. It could happen tomorrow. Everything is in place for it to happen tomorrow. But there are a couple elements that are blocking it and keeping it, and they're using their power from keeping it from happening. So it could happen tomorrow, or it could stretch on for another couple of months, depending upon what's taking place with the elements who are in power that are keeping the dinar from being revalued. But yet, this situation with what's happening in Ukraine could be bringing all of it in together. It's like it's a building puzzle piece that is beginning to unfold, and the picture is starting to become more clear. So join me on the radio program. Call in with your questions. Call in with your comments. Would love to have you. And once again, folks, would love to have you to come to the March 23rd one-day workshop. Because not only are we going to have the workshop, when the workshop ends at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're then going to open it up for a general discussion with everybody that is present, and we'll continue to go as long as the hotel allows us to continue to use the room. And also, it's the opportunity to develop a strong networking of a group of people where we feel we get to network with each other. So thanks again. Enjoy it. Looking forward to being on the radio program tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.